good.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to the PODS Fundamentals Training. Welcome to all of you from around the globe, and I'm glad that you're here. I just realized I need to get a couple technical things going, like showing my screen. Again, I'd like to welcome you to the PODS training series sponsored by Petro IT. Both Julie and I are excited over this PODS Fundamentals training for PODS 7.0, and we're glad that you're all here with us this morning. Some of you attended our spring training, and some of you are new. All of these trainings are recorded, and they can be accessed through links that will be on PODS website. I especially want to thank PODS sponsor. Petro IT is our sponsor for this 6-part series, and Esri is PODS principal sponsor, so thank you very much. I'm happy to have Julie Parker with us as your trainer. She's a geospatial professional who has spent her 20-year career providing impactful location-based information and solutions to clients. And I say impactful in part because her ability to take complex topics and make them understood is really her specialty. And that's our goal for this 6-part training series. She has worked over a decade in the energy industry, working with companies of all sizes. Julie works with Teach Me GIS to provide this training for PODS Association. So welcome, Julie. I'm just really happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be asked back to do another series, and so I'm excited to get started with another series of training.
Awesome, and with that, you have presenter control.
All right, well, I am going to show my screen, and I'm also going to stop my webcam so that you guys can focus on there. And I'm hoping there. Can everyone, can you see it? Okay, awesome. Great. So welcome, everybody. I'm happy, as I said earlier, to be a part of the PODS training series. I feel like these are great little nuggets, if you will, of information that are meant to introduce you to some topics that you might not be familiar with, or to maybe to dig down a little deeper on things that you might already be familiar with. If you're new to the industry, this is a great way to start getting some awareness of industry terms and how data should be managed in this business. Most importantly, though, for this particular series, we're going to be focused on the newest PODS data model, which is PODS 7. So within this, you'll learn not just about the model, but we'll also talk about PODS as an organization, its history, its impact on the industry. We'll also talk, of course, in detail on the model itself and data standards and how PODS differs from some of the other industry data models. So we'll also be talking about real world stuff, things that you deal with, like, well, how do I do this? How do I actually implement PODS, or how do I upgrade from an existing version of PODS and to the latest PODS 7, or how can we make the case to upper management or to other stakeholders in your organization for PODS. So this will be a fully rich and comprehensive series, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoy putting it on. So the audience for this ideally is GIS or IT professionals. It may be folks that are new to the industry, or maybe even people that have been in the industry for a while, but maybe they've never been in a position where they've dealt with pipeline data before. So it's also for people that have had some exposure to PODS, or maybe just have worked in previous versions of PODS. So it's a good opportunity then to just kind of start off with us here on this new version of PODS and get to know it and get comfortable with how it works and how it's put together, and start maybe even getting some ideas about how you can move forward with it. So, in this first series, whoops, sorry. In the first series, we're just going to take things very basically. We're going to actually first just kind of do an introduction to Pod 7. The other subtopics that you see in the slide below in units 2 through 6 lay out the rest of the curriculum for this training series. So you can see we're going to dive into the data management part. We're actually going to take the PODS model and unwrap that for you and do a deeper dive into Pod 7. And then we'll also talk about ways of modifying or extending pods to fit your needs of your organization. And then lastly, we'll talk about information management and also analysis capabilities within pods. So before we jump in too far, Kathy, is there a chat window available to folks, or someone monitoring the chat, so that if they have questions during the webinar today, that people can reach out via the chat?
Thank you for that reminder. Yes, there is. And you'll see a pull down menu for questions. Please type your questions in there. I'll be watching for it, and I'll pose them to Julie.
Yeah,
Thanks.
if we have time at the end, we'll answer them, and if not, we'll definitely be reaching out and giving you the answers that you need, or putting you in touch with the resources that you need. So don't be shy about using the chat. So let's get started with this first introduction to Pod 7. This is going to be basically an explanation of PODS as an organization, but also the PODS data model itself. We're also going to talk about the mindset that you need to work within the PODS environment, or to maybe even consider integrating pods into your organization. There's a certain mindset that you need to adopt in order to be successful with that. Next, we'll talk about how PODS compares with previous versions of PODS. You may not be aware of this, but there are at least 6 previous versions of the PODS model. And so we'll talk about some of the differences that exist between the older versions of PODS and Pod 7. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you choose the right PODS implementation for your organization. It's easier than you think it is. So first off, what is PODS? For those of you that are well acquainted with PODS, you may already know that it stands for PODS Open Data Standard. You'll also know that it's a very flexible data management framework. It's very flexible. It's very easy to customize to your environment, to your particular needs, and it's very comprehensive, meaning that it's meant to encompass the entirety of a pipeline network, pipeline assets. It's also used as a decision-making tool, and certainly is going to optimize performance when you have data stored in the PODS model. Because your data is organized and it is refreshed and managed in a systematic sort of way, it's optimizing the performance of not just the data model, but other things in your organization, other pieces of software that are going to connect to it to get information back out. So it's highly performant. And then lastly, because it is optimized, it's going to make it easy for you to pull the information that you need out of it in order to do your regulatory reporting. So everything that you're going to need to do regulatory reporting with is going to be stored in pods, and so therefore reporting becomes much easier. So as you look at this, The PODS data standards then are actually exemplified or brought to life in the PODS data model. It's planned, it's very well structured, very well thought out, and it's meant to manage and encompass all of the vital pipeline information that you have. Everything that is connected, everything that is in offline storage or stored for later use or what have you, and certainly for processing. It, in short, is completely pipeline centric. It's all about the pipeline. So it's also designed to reside on spatial platforms like Esri's GIS spatial platforms, as well as non-spatial platforms. It is GIS neutral and is also vendor neutral. So it's very open, very accessible to everyone to modify it and take it to use in their organization as they need to. So if you think about the PODS data model and the fact that there's 6 models previous to this one, PODS 7, there's been a lot of key drivers over time that have shaped what we have today as PODS 7. On the left side of my screen, you can see that there's a number as a list, and I won't go through all of them, but these are all of the things that have an impact on the structure of the PODS data models. These are also the same things that touch your existence, your job, your role in your organization as a pipeline management professional. So all of these things are managed and actually shape the PODS data model. As changes occur in certain regulatory areas, for example, you'll see those changes will be reflected in how the model stores that particular type of information. So it's not just a once and done kind of situation. It's very flexible and very extensible. So there's a lot of things then that are going to shape this model, and these are just a few of the key drivers. But interestingly, this is where you're always going to find the PODS data model. It's always going to be sitting there in the middle at the intersection of tangible and intangible aspects of a pipeline network. Here are just a few types of data or asset types that you will find within the PODS data model structure. Certainly, this is not an exhaustive list, but you can see the wide variety from spatial data, the geographic boundaries, for example, all the way to regulatory compliance, to operating information, to ILI data, and surveys and even offshore pipelines. So there's a wide variety of data modeling that can take place within PODS. So you'll see for just about any type of information that's going to be associated with your pipelines, you'll find a holder or a container for it within the PODS model. So through this series, you're going to hear me talk about PODS, the data model PODS, or you may also hear me talk about PODS, the association. And at the beginning here is probably the best place to set up the differences between these two structures. So we have the PODS data model, but then you also have PODS, the organization itself. This is the organization that Kathy Mayo is heading up. She is part of a group of industry experts that are working together to not only make PODS better and better at meeting the needs of pipeline professionals, but she's also working towards raising the awareness of PODS and its usefulness and utility in the industry. So PODS is a excuse me, PODS is a nonprofit association. She is the executive director, and there's also, excuse me, a small part-time staff. There is also an organization of industry volunteers in this membership that are working, lending their expertise and their knowledge and their experience in the advancement and the creation or development of PODS data models. So there's been a tremendous amount of work from volunteers in the industry, for example, that have been working for several years to bring POD 7 to fruition. POD started in 1998, so it's been in existence over 22 years now. So they must be doing something right, and I think they are. They've become a very vital part of the pipeline industry. So here's the mission for PODS. It's to develop and advance global pipeline data standards to support efficient data management and reporting for the oil and gas industry. Pretty wide purview. You can learn more about the organization itself at the web address that you see below there, pods.org. You'll also see the POD's mission touching areas of the pipeline industry as far as budgeting, planning, safety, regulatory issues, industry standards, making workflows more efficient, and certainly collaboration within the groups of volunteers, but also reaching out into the pipeline professional community and interacting and collaborating with them as well. Very vital organization. So you'll hear PODS spoken about then in two different ways. PODS, the data standards, the PODS organization, which oversees and manages the data model. They're providing the standards, developing the standards that are providing the scaffolding for managing pipeline data effectively. So it's important to note that many of the decisions that PODS.org takes are through members themselves, and the consensus that is reached between volunteer groups to reshape and continually drive the excellence in the standards that are found in the data model. You'll also see that there's a tremendous amount, especially with POD 7, a tremendous amount of documentation that's going to go along with POD 7. So it takes a lot of man hours, woman hours to create all of the documentation for the various types of implementations that POD 7 can be done in. So these are volunteers largely that are giving of themselves, their time, their expertise to create this very comprehensive set of documentation. You also then, secondarily, but no less important, is the data model itself. So what you'll see as we go forward is that you will find that there is a logical data model for PODS, one conceptual model for PODS, but also you'll find that there will be numerous physical implementations of that data model. Remember, we talked about earlier that PODS is very flexible and very adaptable to your organization. And so you can imagine with the nuances and the differences between various pipeline operators, for example, there's a lot of differences that are going to occur. Everyone's in the same business, but the way they carry out their business, the way they manage their data, etc., are going to be different. Therefore, the actual physical implementation of PODS is going to vary from company to company. And so the data model bends and flexes in order to fit those implementation standards that must exist in order for our users to be successful in their implementations. So take a moment, if you will, and unpack this picture that you see here. This is a picture that Kathy provided me that is really fascinating. There's a lot going on here. And those of you that are new to the pipeline industry, you may not really know what it is they're doing, but it appears that they are they are doing a weld on this pipeline. It's during the construction phase. You can see that it is surrounded by freshly dug up soil, and you can see the crew there working. But as you look at this picture, it really exemplifies and touches many different aspects of PODS. So getting the right people, for example, on the job at the right time, at the right place, with the right skill levels on this job. Making sure that workers have the correct credentials, the correct qualifications, the training, the safety side of it as well. PODS also has a hand in managing the materials, the pipeline itself, the welding material, the equipment used to weld. There's also lots to be said about pipeline integrity here. So it's important to note that PODS manages almost every aspect of what you see in this picture, including the general geographic location that you see in the background. So the spatial information about this pipeline and where it exists in space, as well as all the integrity information about the pipeline in the foreground. All the data, the specifics about this pipeline. When was it manufactured? Who manufactured it? What type of material is it? What's the thickness, the wall thickness on this particular pipeline? Lots of different information that, if as a seasoned professional, you probably could pull out a lot more information in this picture than I can. But the bottom line is that PODS is active and at work here. Even though you may not see a laptop or a computer anywhere in sight, PODS is there in this picture. So we talked a little bit, I mentioned at the beginning of this series that it takes a certain mindset, I think, to be successful in implementing PODS in an organization or even upgrading it in your organization. And that attitude and that single threaded thought that is running through all the people on your teams and everyone associated with the pipelines is this mindset that your pipeline data is actually an asset of your company. It's a physical asset, to be sure. It's a financial asset. It's an asset for what it does, the product that flows through it. For example, all of these things are assets, but you don't tend to think about it as the data describing this pipeline, and every facet of this pipeline is also an asset too. And this is really the mindset that needs to be adopted. You cannot be cavalier about how data regarding pipelines is managed. It's an asset. It's an asset of the operator, of the construction company, of everyone that is touching this pipeline with an attitude that is an asset is key here. So what do we mean by that? When we think of something as an asset, think of what's your most precious asset? It tends to engender certain types of behaviors, and maybe even processes or procedures are put in place in order to safeguard that asset, because you know it's valuable and you know that if something were to happen to it, you'd be in a world of hurt. So when you're treating this pipeline data as an asset, you're talking about standards of how this data should be managed. You're also talking about the fact that it is managed. you tend to manage things that you care about or that are significant or that must meet regulatory requirements, for sure. You're managing this data because you know how important it is. Ideally, this pipeline collection of data, the pipeline database for your company, if it hasn't reached this status yet, if you're treating this pipeline data as an asset, it becomes the single source of truth about everything connected to a pipeline in your organization. And that's the ideal, that it is the system of record, the authoritative data source where everyone can go and get reliable information about that pipeline and everything associated with it. So these three components then, standards, the management of this data, and its stature as a single source of truth, these are the things that you should aspire to, particularly if you are going to implement pods. It may be a change in your company's culture. It may be a change in the way your teams manage data, how where data is stored, how open it is, how accessible it is to people, and how reliable it is. These may be changes that you have to go through or improvements that you have to make in order to make your system of pipeline information, your PODS database implementation, an authoritative source of pipeline data. So what does that mean? In more detail, when we say that we want pods to become the single source of truth and the authoritative source in an organization, let's drill down a little bit. What does that really mean? It means that your data is complete. Everything that can be known about your pipeline and everything connected with it, surrounding it, is complete, and it exists in your database. It's consistent. There are rules for how your data is managed. There is a feeling that this data is reliable and trustworthy. And it is so because it's accurate. People realize that when they get a figure or a number out of the system, or when they create reports, they can feel comfortable in relying on that data because they know it's accurate. And certainly, if you're going to send this data out as a report to a regulator, you certainly want to have that kind of confidence. And you also want to make sure that the data you're providing that regulatory office is compliant with their standards and their requirements. It's also very important that it be efficient. These days, this data, your PODS data, doesn't just sit in some big computer room somewhere and is only accessible to people that are sitting in the office at their computer. It's actually got to be efficient enough so that it can be anywhere at any time 24/7. So you can be on a laptop in the field, you can be on a handheld device out in the field. It's efficient to work with because your maps, your data associated with features that you're working with is efficiently packaged up to be delivered to whatever device you need to work on. It's also going to give you a certain sense of comfort and safety, knowing that you've got well-managed pipeline data for the company, for yourselves, for your crews, for your teams. And certainly as far as risk management goes, it's a smart move. It does help manage your risk and limit downsides of improperly managed data. So this is why, at the end of the day, it's important. Recently, I was fortunate enough to be able to attend the opening session for the PODS Fall Conference, and there was a very lively and informative speaker there, Scott Taylor, who's called the Data Whisperer. I guess that harkens back to the old movie, The Horse Whisperer, or something like that. But he's really, really very eloquent in how he talks about data and data as an asset. And one of the things that I took away from his presentation was this quote that you see here. Good decisions made on bad data are just bad decisions you don't know about yet. Nowhere in business and industry does this have more meaning. In this business, you can't afford to make bad decisions that you don't know about yet. We don't like surprises in this industry. So it's incumbent upon us to manage our data and ensure the data quality. So I thought this was just a great way to kind of sum everything up in this section where we're talking about data as an asset. It's an asset because in very few other lines of business or work will you see that data quality matters. It matters to people's lives, people's sources of commodities. It matters to business. It matters to people that surround where you're operating. It matters. And I think this is just kind of a great thing to tuck away and maybe let it soak in a little bit as we go through the rest of the slides here. And really, this is going to weave its way through everything that we talk about in this series. So this is how we come down to the point where we say that PODS is the container of choice for pipeline data. It is the hub for data quality, for data accessibility, regardless of how you need to consume and use that data. Certainly the hub for data analytics and reporting. So I guess the bottom line here is that lots of pipeline management activities are improved and integrated. They become more integrated when PODS is part of your business. It often and should become the system of record or the authoritative source for your pipeline data, as well as the hub of all of your pipeline related data that connects to other in-house applications, as well as other third-party software. So it's not meant to be exclusive, your only place that you go. It is the only place you go to contain your data, but because it is contained in the PODS model, there are lots of applications and lots of third-party software, lots of in-house applications you may develop that are going to be able to comfortably access the container of data and pull back with confidence data that is needed for whatever the purpose of the application or what have you. So the bottom line is this is the hub then. It's the container of choice for your pipeline data. So we talked at the beginning about the fact that there were different PODS data model types. And just to be clear, there are different model vintages. You know, there's a PODS 6 and a PODS 4 and so on and so forth that are different models for different times in the development and maturation of the PODS data model series. But there are also different model types within each one of those vintage as well as current models. So those of you that are maybe not steeped in IT you may not be familiar with these terms, and so we want to introduce them to you here so that you can kind of understand as we go forward when we're talking about the PODS conceptual model for POD 7. What are we talking about here? Same thing with the physical model. So let's just dive down here a little bit and talk some about these different data model types. So each one of the PODS data models, whether it's POD 6 or POD 7, has these types of data models. One is the conceptual model. So this is basically just a map of the concepts and all of the relationships that are used for databases. It's basically a very low detail um, organization map of the model, the data model. How you understand the POD 7 data model is through its conceptual model. It's showing these are the things that we are going to store within this POD 7 model. These are the things that we need to relate back to these tables or store in these tables. This is how things are going to relate to each other. These are how the tables will relate to each other in the model. And so it's kind of like that first rough draft idea of how a model could work for pipeline data in your organization. So there's a POD 7 conceptual model, and we're going to go through this. And it's not going to have a lot of the detail in it, but you'll very clearly see what kind of data is going to be stored in this model and what are the relationships between all these data elements. And so you can see the university then, or the universe of everything that will be stored ultimately in the model. The logical model then is going to be a slightly more concrete type of model. It's going to be done in GML, geographic markup language. And basically what it's going to be all about is providing a framework. So this is saying, okay, this is your idea. This is the concept of how you want to store all this information. Now, let's get more detailed about the nuts and bolts about how this is actually going to work. So you'll also see sometimes in a logical data model that it's expressed in terms of data structures, like relational databases. So tables that connect to each other. You'll definitely see that side as we continue on through this series and perhaps even a little later here. But the important thing is that this is where we actually start more finely structuring and defining what the data structures are actually going to be, and also codifying the relationships between the tables that store that information. Lastly is the physical model. And in the physical model, we're talking about the physical schema, the actual built out model. So this is taking your conceptual and logical models and it's making it happen. It's the end result. It's that existing physical model in your environment. So this is where we're going to spend time because we want to prepare you to either implement POD 7 or to upgrade to POD 7. So we're going to be talking more about physical models as we move on. So the cool thing about this, if you're already starting to get nervous about implementation, oh, I don't know. I mean, we have a very unique, complex environment. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do this. Rest assured, you will be able to do this. You'll see that there are lots of implementation choices open to you. And you're probably wondering, well, how am I going to choose the right POD 7 implementation for my company? And I answer that by saying the answer is already inside of your organization. You don't have to search hard for it. It's already there. And by that I mean we have one model, one data model, one PODS 7 conceptual model. This is where you get the first glance at what a conceptual model actually looks like. And we're going to spend a lot more time going through this. But what I want you to take away from here is that there's one data model here that is going to serve many different implementation types, or you'll hear it sometimes mentioned as an implementation pattern. And so you have control over this. And the decision actually comes from what you already have in your company today. What kind of database system do you have? As an example. There'll be many, many implementation patterns, one of which will fit your needs. So it's almost like picking things out of a menu. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but this is not the big choice that you think it is. You're going to first decide or find out, if you don't already know, what kind of database system do you have? Are you strictly an Esri shop where you're working with geodatabases to store all of your pipeline data? Or do you have a relational database system of some type? And if you do, you'll move on to the next block here. Are we saying this is what type of relational database? Is it SQL Server? Is it Oracle? So on and so forth. So depending on these factors, you're winnowing down your choices. And I will say that there's over 20 different implementation patterns here that, and one of them will fit your organization. So you've got next the consideration of whether you have spatial data. And if so, what type of spatial data are you working with? ST geometry, SDO geometry, post-GIS geometry, etc. So depending on how you can answer these questions, so to speak, this is how you will winnow down the possibilities to the implementation pattern that's going to suit your organization. So what else? I mean, once you've kind of looked at the hardware, software side of things, what are the larger considerations then that you need to be cognizant of? First, the first rule of business, right, is ROI. What is this going to do for my company? What is this going to do for my customers, my regulators, etc.? What is the return on this investment? Because to be frank, doing a PODS implementation is financially and resourcefully intensive. It's not a light undertaking by any stretch. But if you have a compelling return on investment, ROI, if you can justify this in a compelling way for your organization, then you may find that you have a credible case then for continuing on with the PODS implementation. This is something that will be up to you and your stakeholders to determine if there's a strong enough ROI to take this step. So you also need to think about what your present enterprise IT infrastructure is. So if you don't know anything about your enterprise IT infrastructure, you're going to have trouble navigating your way through those three shapes or those three blocks that we just looked at a second ago. You're going to need to know about the status of your enterprise IT infrastructure. You'll certainly have to be close with your IT staff through this entire process. You'll have to team up. You also want to look at what software exists in your enterprise environment, particularly on the database side. Remember, you have to understand if you have a relational database management system in place, what is it? Because that is a deciding factor in the PODS 7 implementation that you come up with. And then think about your organizational level of expertise. Do you have a lot of seasoned staff and well-trained technical experts that can help you through this process and team with you on this process? It will take a village to do this. It's not a one-man or two-man operation. It will take expertise. And sometimes you may need to search outside for this expertise, but there are many, many PODS members that are outside the pipeline operator space and they're there to help. They understand PODS. They may even have certain tools or certain types of software that connects up with PODS that will mesh well with your organization. So you have to take stock basically of what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses as an organization? And do we have a credible, strong ROI case for taking this up for approvals? So this might help bolster your case. Why should we implement PODS? First of all, it's meant for the pipeline industry. It's flexible, it's reusable. You can change it as your technology is changing. You can match it up to technology you already have. If you certainly upgrade to or change relational database systems, for example, it's flexible enough to adjust to that. It's designed to fit with whatever you have right now. There's over 25. I said over 20. Still counts. Over 25 PODS implementation patterns. So rest assured then that PODS has you covered. Whatever you need to do is doable. You'll see that the PODS data model is easy to understand. It's very well documented. It's simpler to implement than you might realize. It's extendable, and most importantly, it's usable. So it's no wonder that PODS has become the standard in modeling pipeline data. It is enabling for your organization. If you presently have your pipeline data in a lot of different buckets with no cohesive organization and perhaps your pipeline data is not seen as an authoritative source. If people are hopping out to third-party applications or to other sources for what they think might be better data, this is a flag that you might want to consider organizing your data within the PODS data model. It will definitely enable your organization, and it will also help solve a lot of problems with access to data, with reporting, and with data management. There are lots of ways to extend and leverage the power of PODS. At the same time, standardizing your data and making it that asset that it's meant to be for your company. So if you want to learn more about this, there is a download available from PODS, from the pods.org website. It's available for members only. So your organization, if it is not already a PODS member, will need to become a PODS member in order to download the model. Once it's downloaded, it's yours. Free to tailor it as you need to fit your own organization. So in summary, Just some more reasons, some rationale of why you should rely on PODS. PODS is a set of data standards. It's very robust and extremely flexible and a well-proven data model. It stood the test of time and it just keeps getting better. The PODS organization, its leadership, like Kathy and others that are leading the charge at PODS, are shaping this data model because they have a stake in this job as well. They're pipeline professionals or data management professionals themselves. They all have day jobs. They're volunteers. So it's ready for you. The PODS data model is ready for you to customize, download, and get ready to use it. Bottom line here, the standards as well as the data model itself are meant to design and promote in reliability, trust, efficiency, safety, and risk management, as well as preparing you to meet the demands of your regulators and all of your compliance activities. So with that, I've used up every bit of my time. I will take some time if there's any questions that I can help answer, Kathy, I'm happy to do so. But that ends this first unit, and we will press on next time with the next installment of this series. Thank you for your attention, and thanks for being a part of this new series.
Julie, thank you very much. And while I wait for questions to come in, I just want to express my appreciation for that foundation that you've set. Some of you may have an understanding of this. Others, I think it's always worth hearing again because it really starts at setting that important foundation. This is something that Scott Taylor, PODS keynote for our fall conference, talked about. It really starts with how you lay that out for your data. And that is, he couldn't overstate more that it starts with standards. And so that review really was helpful. So I appreciate it.
Sure.
Remind us of what we're going to be going into for Unit 2, just so people know where we're going as we look at really understanding POD 7.
Okay.
Can you
Sure.
pull up that slide again?
The slide at the beginning.
Yep, where we
Okay.
just start unpacking pods. So
Okay. So
planning for your data management.
planning. If you can see, when we start at Unit 2, we're going to actually, this will be the precursor then to getting deep into the model. And so we're going to talk about kind of setting yourself up for success, understanding more about what a data model really is and what are the components. How does POD 7 actually fit into this data model? Excuse me. And then beyond Unit 2 is where we're going to really pop the top on POD 7 and begin looking at the nuts and bolts of how these data tables are set up, how they work, what goes in them, how you can build in that trust and reliability that you're seeking to build and create in your PODS data model project.
You're absolutely right, Julie. Thank you.
Mhm.
You know, one thing that Julie mentioned early on also is recognizing that you as GIS professionals or integrity managers, IT specialists or professionals need to explain this to your managers who then talk to the C-level about it in your companies with regard to migrating to 7 and upgrading your PODS implementation or starting your PODS implementation. One thing that PODS Association can provide, and I can work with you on, is getting some simple slides and some background that helps you build your case in talking to your managers. So contact me if you have that interest. If you find that you're needing to make a presentation, internally for your organization so that they can understand the value and the benefits of a PODS implementation and of PODS 7. And I would love to work with you on that. So thanks.
Mhm.
We have a question on PODS website. Yes, everything that you see. If we can't attend all the sessions, will there be recordings available on PODS website? Absolutely. You will be able to find links to then go over to where we house all of our recordings and pick up the various units that will be presented between now and mid-December.
Also, there's the last series. So if we're starting ahead of where you are, maybe you're new to this and you need to pick up some of the basics, the last series of 6 units is also available for you to download too.
Right. Any other questions? I am going to. Do you have any final comments? And we will just wrap up with that.
I have no final comments except to express my thanks for the opportunity to once again be a part of this series, and I wanted to also thank the audience as well for participating, and I look forward to next week's session.
Great. And again, I encourage all of you to go and sign up for future units. That can be done again from PODS website. You can register. We are not charging for these trainings. And I encourage you to have your team members also sign up. I'd like to thank our sponsors again, Petro IT, who is our training sponsor for PODS Fundamentals, and also our principal sponsor, Esri. So with that, we'll close. Thank you, Julie. I look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing everybody next week for Unit 2. Again,
Awesome.
you have a great day.
Thanks,
Thank
Kathy.
you.